Transferable skills.
From Cackle Media, this is Transferable Skills. I'm Noah Mishkin. Today's guest is Colonel Matthew Mattner, who shares his skills journey from the U.S. Army into Healthcare Chief Operating Officer. I hope you enjoy. Matthew, I just want to say welcome to our show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Noah. I'm really excited to be here. I've listened to your show, and I'm so impressed with the self-awareness of people of finding interest or opportunity to do something that they didn't think they wanted or were dabbling in, but really found that that was their passion. And so I'm happy to share my experiences.
We appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks.
You know, I looked at your LinkedIn, and in the intro that was made for us, you spent a lot of time in the military.
I spent a little time in the Army, yes.
Yeah. Were you thinking of Army when you were in high school and earlier? Like, how did you make that decision? And did you know that it was going to be kind of the career path versus just a few years?
My dad was the postmaster in our hometown. He was a Navy veteran and a first-generation American citizen, very patriotic. So as I was in high school, I think it was more which service was I going to join, not if I was going to join military service.
That's awesome. I like that you shared that with your father. It's nice to be interested in the same things and to share those values. And it's a testament to his legacy.
And so I had the opportunity to talk to the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army about their services. The recruiters would pop in and see who had registered for the selective service. And my dad would, as the postmaster, knew their addresses, so he could direct them to where those young men lived. So I had the opportunity to talk to all the recruiters and learned about ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Program in colleges, and thought that that would be a good way to start my military service. Applied for scholarships from the Air Force and the Army, was awarded a scholarship from the Army, and that set me on the course to joining the Army after college. And a short 27 and a half years later, I retired from the Army.
I have a lot of respect for anyone who has devoted any amounts of their time, let alone 27 and a half years, in service of their country. I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
You had looked at all the branches. You kind of assessed all of them. Your father was in the Navy. You applied for scholarships from the Air Force and the Army. You were awarded the Army scholarship. Was that the ultimate decision? And was there any feelings of, I got this scholarship, but I'm still feeling some sort of connection to Navy or some other branch of the military? Or was it just an easy decision? They're going to give me the money and the opportunity to pursue this, so I'm going to follow that path.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, my father passed away when I was a senior in high school. And so Army ROT scholarship was a way for me to get a college education and pay for it. Without that scholarship, I may not have gone to school, or I may have started and not finished college. Growing up, there was an expectation I was going to college, my expectation as well as my parents. The scholarship really became a means to an end to get that college degree. Without it, I wouldn't have gone to the Air Force or Navy. I likely would have stayed in Army ROTC.
Can you give us a little insight into what college life is like as a member of the ROTC? Because I've attended classes with ROTC cadets, candidates, and service members, and I'm curious what the experience, how it differs from a more traditional college experience and what the demands are from time commitment and just overall experience for somebody in ROTC.
Yeah, so as part of the curriculum, there are leadership courses for all 4 years of college, basic leadership 101 classes that anyone can take. The first 2 years of ROTC, you could participate in ROTC with no commitment, no requirement to join the service or work towards a commission. But contracted cadets, those last 2 years, set you on the path to a commissioning and service in the military. So those ROTC classes were counted as electives.
Where were you in school?
Whitewater, Wisconsin.
Fantastic. Great place to be.
Great business school, which is why I got a degree in physics. We can talk about that later. In addition to that, there are early morning physical training sessions a couple of times a week, and a leadership laboratory, which was early in the morning, 1 day a week. So really the commitment for the ROTC training was less than what college athletes put in for their sport. There's not a lot of additional time or commitment required for ROTC.
So your second choice was medical, what was it? Medical
Service Corps. Yeah, Healthcare Administration.
That was your second choice. Was that because you had an interest in medicine, maybe you wanted to be a doctor one day, you weren't sure, but why was that your second choice, or why was that a choice at all?
Actually, my first choice was aviation. I wanted to be a pilot. In the Army, the pilots are in the aviation branch and the medical service corps branch. The air ambulance helicopters, the commissioned officers are medical service corps officers. The warrant officer pilots in the Army go anywhere that they're assigned, to include medevac units. And so as a commissioned officer, my two options were aviation or medical service corps. And so I studied physics. I wasn't a great student. I didn't have a very high GPA, but I did good on the flight aptitude test. I did good in the leadership scoring at the advanced camp. I got great recommendations from my instructors in ROTC. So I was fortunate to get my second choice, but I wasn't competitive enough in that selection process to get my first choice.
Were you ever able in your service to get the aviation part of it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Some medical service corps officers were able to go straight to flight school after their officer basic course or training. I didn't. I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, spent 2 years at Fort Campbell to include a deployment to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, left the desert, had about a week to transition from Fort Campbell down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and started flight school in January of 1991, just as the ground campaign was kicking off in Saudi Arabia. Spent 2 years in the infantry as a medical platoon leader, myself, a physician assistant, 30 medics, taking care of 700 infantrymen who walked a lot at Fort Campbell. Yes, there are a lot of helicopters there, and we got to ride them to wherever we were going, but then there was a lot of walking. As a platoon leader that had vehicles, my resources were sought out frequently. After 2 years there in a deployment to the desert, I was able to get to flight school.
Before we get to flight school, because I've got some questions about that, your time in the desert, how do you adjust emotionally, physically to the conditions that are so different than home?
I don't know. We just adapt. The training that we go through in the Army, every 3 months you were doing field training exercises. So it's basically a 3-month rotation of being the 18th Airborne Corps' ready battalion to deploy in 18 hours, to supporting Fort Campbell and the various missions on base, to a training in the field, pack stuff up, go to the field. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, come home, recover the equipment, and get ready to deploy again. Through that cycle, you're constantly evolving, adapting, changing to the environment. Some of those training exercises may have taken us to the National Training Center in California, which is a desert training space for high-intensity conflict, down to the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana, which is more of a smaller force-on-force, wooded terrain, lower-intensity conflict experience. Deploying to the desert was just another environment we were going to. And
get conditioned, do it fast, and just keep on moving on.
You just do what your mission is to do, and you're just doing it in another location.
You're about, what, 22, 23?
23 or 24 years old.
In charge of a lot. People, equipment. What's that like to suddenly be a leader that people are looking up to and relying on at such a young age?
As I've looked back and reflected, I was a leader since high school. Whether you take captain of a sports team to president of the student council, I started to go to the school board meetings representing the students, which hadn't been done before, just to be aware of what our board was deciding for us as students and being able to share that then with the student population. The leadership training through college for 4 years of ROTC, didactic training, and then experiential leadership opportunities, to being a platoon leader at Fort Campbell, Kentucky in the 101st Airborne Division, lead the organization, lead the people. Very important, the relationships. Very quickly in ROTC and at Fort Campbell learned I wasn't going to ask someone to do something that I wasn't willing to do myself.
the analogy between the military service and sports, very similar in some ways, and also in a smaller way, but a very important way in traditional business, in that you have to be an effective leader by way of building trust with the people you work alongside. And you have to be willing to do all the work that you're delegating as well, and know enough about it to have the confidence that you can speak to it, but also trust your people to get the job done well. So there's a lot of correlations there. It's almost like you were on a fast track. It was quick, throw this guy, give him a few years of leadership training and experience through ROTC, throw him in the deep end. And if this is the right person, which clearly part of that selection process makes sense, how you scored your behavior, the recommendations of who you are as an ROTC student and candidate for the military, they're picking the right people that they have the confidence are going to get the job done and be able to be the correct leader in those situations. And so you're there, now you come back and you're in flight school. When you start flight school, is it known what kind of vehicles you're training on? Or is it just, we're going to give you basic physics and flight school training, and then you'll start to sort of refine and figure out what it is that you're training for later?
Early on in the training, the flight school session, they had this computer-based monochromic machine that had the flight controls on it. We're told to keep the dot in the middle of the screen or in the top corner. And so you had to manipulate the stick you had in your hand and your foot pedals to keep that dot where you were instructed to keep that dot. And that was part of the aptitude of which aircraft you would best be suited for. And then they take into consideration your biometrics, how tall you are, what your sitting height is, what your inseam is, because certain biometrics don't fit in certain airframes.
And the Air Force, like I've heard, the difference between sitting in an F-16 and an F-18 is vastly different. You're just physically not going to fit in every cockpit.
Right.
That's so interesting to think about the physiology, the biomechanics as being part of qualifications for what type of training and planes or helicopters that you might be better for.
Exactly. And so tall guy may not fit in a small scout aircraft, and there may be weight requirements that, we've got to consider the size and weight of the pilot and the center of gravity of the aircraft and what makes sense and what's going to work. And it's raw because you haven't started any of your flight training yet. So it's what is your raw talent?
Yeah.
What's the raw material the Army is starting with for flight school?
You're actually bringing up something that is definitely interesting to focus on that I don't think I've spent enough time talking about, which is the idea of raw talent. It's so interesting to now evaluate a trajectory in your military career by way of just looking at your raw talents. It'd be interesting to figure out or to apply certain exams and tests and self-evaluations, even at the late high school stage. If people are trying to think about what do I want to study in college or what kind of fields do I want to go into, it's interesting to look at just raw talent before you have any training to back it up and to improve on it. That's wild to me.
Our flight instructors were old Vietnam era pilots who were crusty and characters and had incredible experiences. Many of them had Purple Hearts, had been shot down at least once.
By the way, that's a crazy statement. Shot down at least once.
Yeah.
Survived, got back in the saddle.
And flew again.
Flew again, maybe shot down again. You think about what that does to a person's personality, how they adjust over time to high pressure situations. And also maybe that adrenaline junkie, the people who love the, not just combat, but intense situations.
They were an incredible group of men who were great instructors, great people. My primary instructor pilot was not a Vietnam vet and hadn't learned to fly in the Army. He was kind of an outsider that came in to helicopters, but still a great instructor and a phenomenal guy that I stayed in touch with for many years. When I was back at Fort Rucker, we socialized and did things together. But as a whole, that group of Vietnam vets were an incredible group of instructors who were setting us on a course for success in aviation. And keep in mind that Desert Shield and the high intensity conflict was going on or had just recently concluded. And so the reality of flying in combat was apparent to all of us.
This stuff is exciting to me from a mechanical standpoint, from a team camaraderie standpoint. It's all interesting to me. You finished flight school. What was the next few steps of your military career like? What were you doing?
Yeah, so I finished flight school, of course, wanted to fly. So asked colleagues and friends, where should I ask to be assigned? Everybody said Europe or Asia. So Korea was high on the list. So I asked for Korea, and An unaccompanied tour, no family, unattached. It was an easy fit for the branch folks to say, what, you're asking to go to Korea? Certainly I have a place for you in Korea. Off to Korea I went, the only air ambulance company on the peninsula. There were 2 lieutenant positions open. One of my flight school buddies was also arriving at the same time as I was. He stayed in Seoul and I was sent down to Daegu, down in the southern part of the peninsula. 6 aircraft in cruise, a captain in charge, me as the lieutenant. We took care of the southern third of the peninsula, evacuations from Busan, Daegu, other training areas. The Marines would come to Pohang on the eastern coast. We supported them and their services and their training exercises with transfer points to another platoon partway to Seoul. Sometimes we would fly all the way into Seoul, but we didn't have enough gas to get back home, so we'd have to stop and refuel. Went over for a 1-year tour, ended up staying 2. Met my wife and got married. We came back to the States for 6 months for the Aviation Officer Advanced course. Although I was medical, I had the choice of either the Army Medicine or the Aviation Officer Advanced course. I chose the Aviation because I wanted to fly. I wanted to be a part of that community. I got back to Germany, flew there for a year and a half before being offered an opportunity to command a non-aviation company. I did that, and we went to Bosnia for 6 months to support the continuing implementation efforts to separate the Croats and the Serbs and maintain the peace in Bosnia. Went to a division, a higher echelon level position as the medical evacuation officer for the division, which is really in combat would be assisting with what resources are on the battlefield and where are patients going based on their injuries or wounds. Was given the opportunity to get my graduate degree that the Army paid for. So off to Missouri for a master's degree in aviation safety, back to Fort Rucker, Alabama for my 3rd trip there for 2 years, where I inspected aviation programs across the world for their aviation medicine programs. Back to Korea for 3 years, where I flew along the DMZ supporting the 2nd Infantry Division, got to fly and see the southern parts of North Korea and fly into the joint security area and be 10 feet away from the border, the true border between North and South Korea in a helicopter, full RPMs.
That's got to be wild.
It was exercising the landing rights of non-combatant aircraft. The North Koreans did the same thing on the other side of the line of demarcation. That's where my flying career ended. Went to Washington, D.C., where I was an inspector general for the Army. Back to Germany for 5 years, where I commanded an outpatient medical clinic. I worked on the Army Europe staff for training exercises and medical support, to the 5th Corps headquarters, where I was the chief of staff, which is not a typical job for an Army medicine person, to my last assignment at Fort Drum, New York, where I commanded the health system for the 10th Mountain Division and the post in northern New York. And then from there, I retired and did something different.
Can you tell me what it's like to live for 5 years overseas? 1 year, that's a big commitment. 5 years is even greater. How much of your time is spent off base outside of the military confines where you're immersing yourself to some degree with the local culture?
Take it back to the first tour in Korea. Most of my time was spent on base, flying with my crews, maintaining the aircraft. So I didn't spend much time in the community. Most of our interaction with the Korean community was on base through different recreation opportunities. We had a golf course on base, so golf with the Koreans, dinner, or just community business leadership interactions with the base through the base commander. When I was in Germany the first time, we lived off base in a German community. We were the only Americans in this small village for the second half of our tour in that 4-year tour. And so we interacted a lot with the locals and participated with the local soccer club. And my neighbor picked me up on Saturday morning, and we'd go to the local butcher shop and the bakery and get the local meats and breads and cheeses. And I played a little ice hockey then, so we got to interact with some of the ice hockey clubs across Germany. We were able to set up friendly games and drink beer on the bench and interact with them. second tour in Korea, I was married, so I had a built-in interpreter. I was still playing ice hockey, and so got to interact with a lot of different people in a lot of different venues. Back in Germany, in those senior leadership positions, I got to do all of those military-related community relations events. But I also got my German hunting license when I went back to Germany. I spent a lot of time with the hunters in Germany, locally around our base and in other places as we'd get invited to hunt in different places.
What are you hunting out there?
Oh gosh, red deer, big stags that look like elk, but
Yep.
roe deer, which are much smaller, fallow deer, wild boar. Went into the mountains of the Alps and hunted chamois. You name it, we had the opportunity to hunt them.
How's your German?
I spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. Not very good. I say I can speak enough to get in trouble, but not get out of trouble.
That's great. Before we kind of transition from the end of your career into the next stage, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about two things for those who are just listening and not watching. Who's on that Green Bay Packers football that you have behind you? It looks like it's autographed by maybe a team.
Yep. So that is the 2014 Super Bowl team that signed that. I've been a Packer fan my whole life, being from Wisconsin. So that's a 2014 Packer football. My folks at Fort Drum, when I retired, they wrote to the Packers, and I got a nice letter from them along with that autographed football.
That's awesome. So Rodgers is on there.
Yes.
That's Rodgers in his peak. That was a great era of football. Second thing is, what watch are you wearing right now?
I got a Tag Heuer.
I knew it was a Tag Heuer. It looks like a Formula One.
It is. Yep.
Yeah. I have the same watch. Do you feel an affinity as a pilot to chronographs?
I do.
Yeah.
That's what I look for in a watch. Got an old Seiko that has a circular slide rule on it.
Oh my God. That is amazing. It's probably collectible, to be honest. I've never seen one like that.
Could be.
The end of your military career in the Army, rank, position, what were you doing when you retired?
Yeah. So when I retired, I was a colonel in 2006, and I was leading the health system at Fort Drum, New York, which is not a big transition to where I am today. But my bigger transition occurred earlier in my career in the Army. As I said, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly. I had done everything I could to get to the next level of aviation in the Medical Service Corps. And as I was in Korea, around the 2003, 2004 mark in Korea and leaving Korea, the medical helicopters used to be part of Army medicine and were organized and led by aviation experts in Army medicine. The Chief of Staff of the Army at the time and a few others felt that was unsafe, that they had this perception that Medical Service Corps pilots were not good pilots, and accidents were occurring because of bad decision making. And so decision was made by the Army to change the structure and take those air ambulance companies and put them into aviation battalions. And so everything that I had done to be a battalion commander, those battalion command opportunities had been taken away from me. So I had to find something else to do in the Army if I wanted to stay in the Army. And I was retirement eligible at this point. And I'd had a couple of friends who had transitioned into the clinic and hospital leadership positions and said that that's something that I should pursue. There was an opportunity off the central commander select list process to command clinics in Germany. So I put my name in the hat and was selected as an alternate. Some of the people on the primary list got selected for promotion, so they were no longer eligible. So I was fortunate and pulled off the alternate list to command a clinic. There was always the tactical side of healthcare and the brick and mortar side of healthcare that are kind of a rivalry, and not everybody makes the transition from the tent and tactical to the brick and mortar. Those guys are the rear echelon. They're not really in the Army kind of folks. There's the hardcore infantry, Army, embrace the suck. We do the hard stuff. The folks who work in the hospitals and clinics, they've got the easy jobs, and we don't want to be like them. I had to make that transition to be like them and work in a clinic. But I found that being an aviator with my instrument panel, I knew where my aircraft was and what it was doing in relation to the center of the earth, whether I was climbing or descending, turning. flying straight, speeding up, slowing down, just by looking at my instrument panel. And I found that there were metrics or instruments in the brick and mortar side of healthcare that told me about the health of the organization and how well we were supporting or providing the care to our community. Whether that was access and how easy it is for a patient to make an appointment, to the coding and billing of how well were we doing recording the care that we were providing, to the length of time, maybe a specialty referral, how quickly it was acted on or how slowly it was acted on, or whether or not we were providing quality of care. In a helicopter, if you make a change to one of your 4 controls, you likely have to make a change to one or more of the other controls to have the aircraft do what you wanted it to do. In healthcare, if you make a change in one space, you have to anticipate what that change is going to impact in other spaces and be able to either counter or accept what those changes are going to be. And so through my healthcare instrument panel, I was able to anticipate a change here would make these other things occur. And if those were not desired, then I had to make another change somewhere else to keep the organization heading in the right direction the way we wanted it to go.
What a great analogy. Talking about, dashboard metrics and looking at reporting and data and feedback that you're getting, but equating it to the instrument panel that you have in front of you that is helping you, write the course and stay on track.
Exactly. My transition from the tactical side of the Army to healthcare occurred when I lost the opportunity to continue in my role in aviation in Army medicine. But then transitioning from the Army to civilian life, what was different was the finances of healthcare. And military health system is given so much money by Congress to do what the military health system does. So the Army health system had a portion of that military health system set of dollars, and it was in buckets, but you knew what your budget was, and here's your budget, go do what we've asked you to do. Transitioning to the civilian side, it's a very different financial and very complicated financial processes through revenue cycle and dealing with insurance companies, because now I was interested in, well, how is that going to be paid for? In the military, the patient could see the doctor, no problem, through telecapabilities. But in civilian healthcare, the doctor and the patient have to be in the same state, or the doctor has to be licensed in the state where the patient is. Who was paying for that teleservice? In the military, it was paid for through the appropriations process. But in civilian care, there's the insurance claims process that the insurance may not pay for that service between patient and provider. And so who's paying for it?
Is that a frustrating part of the job, or was it just about getting acclimated to that?
It wasn't frustrating. It was just becoming acclimated to, this is the way things are outside of the military, or this is the way the U.S. health system is set up. The key driver in a lot of decisions in civilian healthcare is that we can do that, but we have to make sure that the insurance companies or Medicare are going to pay for the service that we're offering.
Looking back at your 27 and a half years in the Army, thinking about the specific skills that you had gained over those 27 and a half years, what has been maybe the most impressionable and instrumental in helping you transition into the civilian private sector, into the hospital health system now in this part of your career?
It took me a long time to realize I wasn't the smartest person in the room and I didn't have all the answers. Put it this way. People ask, well, what kind of a leader are you? Well, there's the very democratic leader where you put everything to a vote and whatever the majority votes on is what the organization or your team is going to do. There's the very autocratic side, the draconian, fear the leader, what I say goes, or don't ask any questions, just do what I tell you to do. There's really everything in between. Are you a consensus builder? Do you have to have everybody agree with the plan before you execute the plan? Are you slow to make a decision, that you're a people person, you don't want to upset anybody, so your decisions are based on your relationships with the people that you have? Are you an adaptive leader? Can you be autocratic at times, collaborative at times, democratic at times? How do you define yourself as a leader? I'm all of those. I'm not afraid to make a decision, but I want to make the right decision. And so you may want me to make a decision right now, but I want a little more information to make sure that the decision I want to make is the right one. I don't have to make that decision right now, so I'm not going to.
A lot of times we find ourselves making quick decisions because we feel the pressure that the other person is imposing upon us. But in reality, you're the one that they're coming to make that decision, and you're to some degree in control. And it's okay to ask for more time, or at least to state that you require more time and or information before coming to a conclusion or determination. Sometimes we feel that pressure, whether it's as a parent, a spouse, right, or a colleague, professionally speaking. It's okay to say, let me think about that for a little longer, or maybe I need more information and then I can come to a conclusion.
And then if we're going to make a change or we're going to do something, I have an idea of how we can accomplish what we need to accomplish. But my idea isn't the best idea in most cases. And so rather than say, let's do this, I say, what do you think we should do? If you were making the decision, what would you do?
Yeah, it's like part of what infuriates me in like mental health therapy, clinical therapy is, and how did that make you feel? It's like, or I'm not sure how to look at this. Well, how do you think you should look at that? It's like, well, just tell me, give me the answer. But the reason why that methodology is practiced most often is because you're empowering the individual who probably already has more information than you and knows the right course to take. But just asking it in that way allows diversity of perspective and decision-making in the process, as well as relying on the individual to come to that conclusion.
And then help those leaders or those people further by saying, well, how do you think that's going to impact the people doing the job? Should we ask them what we should do? They're the ones that are doing the work. Will they have the best solution, or will you and I, thinking about this in a vacuum, have the best solution? And so that to me has been the biggest takeaway in my many years of leadership, that I'm not the smartest person in the room. I don't always have the best solutions, and applying a lot of those lean principles of from the bottom up. What are the ideas? What needs to change? What's going to be the impact of the change? And then me as the leader providing the resources and the accountability to make sure that the change is implemented in the way that is beneficial to the employees as well as the organization. And in most cases for us now, it's the patients.
Very valuable insight, perspective, and discipline principles that I think myself, our audience will find very helpful. So I thank you for sharing that. Great perspective. I love it. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. And I'm glad that we had it. I probably could talk to you for another 3 weeks without taking a breath. But I want to say thank you very much, Colonel Mattner. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Thank you for your years of service and dedication to our country and our fellow countrymen. And I just want to say thank you for sharing that here on the show with us.
Thanks, Noah.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Aviva Clayman for recommending Colonel Mattner as today's guest, and to you, our listeners. Editor for this episode was Aaron Wertheimer. Thank you for listening, and remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.